All right, so get this, we're diving into China's tech scene today. But not just the factories. We're
Right.
talking about the really cutting-edge stuff, AI, biotech, even space exploration.
Definitely. And that's actually a really good point to start with.
Okay.
It's not just about manufacturing anymore. It's about real innovation across a range of industries. I mean, one of the sources you sent even said China is setting new rules.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I mean, that really stood out to me. And I mean, one article even talked about how China is now moving past generics and developing totally new medicines. Like they're attracting huge licensing deals from companies like AstraZeneca and GSK. We're talking billions of dollars here.
And it's not just about the money, it's about the strategy. They're using their large patient base and the lower cost of clinical trials to quickly develop and test new therapies. I mean, it's really smart. It could totally change how the whole pharmaceutical industry works,
Yeah, and it's not just copying existing drugs either.
Right, it's not about that at all.
It's making them better, more effective, fewer side effects.
Exactly. They're focusing on bio-better drugs,
Okay.
One area they're actually doing really well in is antibody drug conjugates. These are targeted cancer therapies that are being a ton of interest globally. And that's where those big licensing deals are coming from.
Interesting. Okay, but let's switch gear for a second and talk about AI, because this is where things get really, really interesting.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You sent over some info about this Chinese startup called DeepSeek, and they're building AI models that are doing better than some of the big names in the West. And they're doing it with less advanced hardware.
It is incredible, and they're also doing it at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
It's a great example of their innovation,
Okay.
They use this open source model, which means they share their code publicly. It lets them iterate and improve things really fast. It's a totally different approach compared to companies like OpenAI, who keep everything closed source.
I was reading that one of their models, DeepSeek's R1 model, actually beat OpenAI's latest model in tests for math coding. Even general knowledge. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Absolutely, it is significant. OpenAI spent something like $100 million developing GPT-4. DeepSeek only spent about $5.6 million on their DeepSeek V3 model, and they're still getting results that are comparable. It makes you wonder about how sustainable the traditional AI development model really is, Maybe Western companies need to rethink things.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The U.S. is trying to restrict China's access to those advanced chips from NVIDIA, and it might have actually backfired in a way because it's pushed them to innovate even more.
It really makes you think about the effectiveness of sanctions in the long run. DeepSeek's success using older generation GPUs is proof that you can still have incredible innovation even when you have limitations. It's like they've turned a constraint into a way to be even more creative with their problem solving.
Okay, let's move on to electric vehicles. Those articles you sent me paint a pretty clear picture. Chinese EV makers are not messing around. Companies like BYD and NIO are selling really well in China, and they're going global.
What I think is most interesting is that they're not just focused on building the cars, they're thinking about the whole ecosystem. They're pushing for innovation in battery technology and charging infrastructure. I mean, look at NIO. They're setting up battery swapping stations in China.
So you're saying instead of waiting for your car to charge,
Yeah.
you can just swap out the battery in minutes?
Exactly. No more range anxiety.
That would be a game changer.
It's a great example of China's strategic long-term thinking. They're investing heavily in every part of the EV experience to make sure they're leading this fast-growing market. That kind of comprehensive approach is something we're seeing a lot of across their whole tech sector.
Okay, so speaking of strategic thinking, what about semiconductors? I mean, the U.S. has been trying to stop China from developing its own chip-making capabilities. But one of the sources you sent talked about how Huawei is making progress despite those sanctions.
Huawei is the perfect example of China's determination to not rely on anyone else for technology. Despite being cut off from important suppliers, they've continued to develop their own chips, like their Kirin processors.
Yeah, I read about that.
They may not be leading the pack yet in semiconductor manufacturing, but their progress shows just how committed they are to becoming self-sufficient in this incredibly important area of technology.
So instead of backing down, they're basically doubling down
Exactly.
to try and close that gap.
Their continued investment in semiconductor technology shows that they understand just how crucial it is for the future of tech. Everything from AI to smartphones. This push for independence is one of the main drivers behind all the advancements we're seeing in China's tech world.
Okay, so we've covered biotech, AI, EVs, and even touched on semiconductors. What else is out there? What else stood out to you from these articles and reports?
Well, there are a couple of other areas where China's really shaking things up. One that really caught my eye was their progress in space tech. They've successfully launched and are now running their own space station, Tiangong.
Wait, their own space station?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal. That's not just about being good at technology. It seems like it's a statement, you know?
It is. It shows they're not just interested in taking part in space exploration, they want to lead it. They're investing a lot in research and development, and it's pretty obvious they want to be a major player in the space race.
So it's about global influence, too.
Oh, absolutely. And their space program is just one example. They're also making strides in quantum communication, developing these super secure data transmission networks.
Yeah, I read a little bit about that.
It could revolutionize cybersecurity and how we protect data.
So they're really thinking long-term, investing in these technologies that could give them a huge advantage down the road.
Yeah, exactly. That long-term vision is something you see over and over in China's approach to tech. They're not just looking for quick wins. They're setting themselves up for long-term dominance in key areas.
Okay, so let's bring things back down to earth for a minute and talk about something a little closer to home, like smartphones. One of the articles mentioned that Xiaomi is planning to put DeepSeek's AI tech into 25 of their smartphone models. What does that even mean for the average person using a Xiaomi phone?
It means their phones are going to get a lot smarter. Remember how we talked about DeepSeek's R1 model and how it outperforms some of the more expensive AI models out there? Well, imagine having that kind of AI power right in your pocket.
So it's not just about faster processing or better graphics. It's about the phone actually being more intelligent.
Exactly. Things like voice assistants that can understand what you're saying, even if it's complicated, personalized recommendations based on what you do on your phone. Even real-time language translation, they're basically giving everyone access to really sophisticated AI.
That sounds like it could totally change the smartphone market. I mean, suddenly it's not about having the best processor, it's about having the best AI.
It could definitely happen, and it shows how China's tech advancements are finding their way into everyday products. It's making cutting-edge technology available to everyone.
This kind of goes back to something we've been talking about, China's focus on making technology affordable and accessible. It seems like that's a key part of their strategy.
It is. They're using their manufacturing power and economies of scale to make high-quality tech products that are priced competitively. It's putting pressure on the big players in the global market. They have to innovate and adapt, or they'll get left behind.
So it's not just about competition in terms of who has the best technologies. It's also about who can make that technology available to the most people.
Exactly. And that focus on accessibility is a big part of China's growing influence in the world of tech. They're not just making things for the wealthy. They're making cutting-edge technology for everyone.
That makes sense. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit. What about the global economy? We talked about how China wants to move up the value chain, not just be the world's factory. How's that going?
Well, one of the biggest impacts is on global trade. China's becoming more self-sufficient in things like semiconductors, and that's changing how global supply chains work.
So they're not relying on other countries as much for important components.
Right, and that could have a big impact on the economies of countries that have traditionally supplied those components.
Right.
As China gets better at making its own chips, for example, it needs Western suppliers less. And that shift could reshape global trade and create new centers of economic power.
It seems like this is all happening at the same time as this growing competition between China and the U.S., almost like a battle over who will dominate technology.
Absolutely. The trade tensions between the U.S. and China are a clear sign of that rivalry. Both countries want to control key technologies and markets, and that competition is changing how the global economy works.
One of the articles you sent called it the AI efficiency wars. What does that even mean?
It means there's a race to develop AI that's not just powerful, but also super cost-effective, like we talked about with DeepSeek. They've shown that you can achieve similar results to Western AI, but spend way less money.
So just like with consumer tech, it's not just about having the best AI, it's about making it affordable too.
Exactly, and that's a big part of China's strategy when it comes to AI. They have access to huge amounts of data, and their labor costs are lower, so they can develop and train AI models much more cheaply. It gives them a real advantage in a field that's becoming more and more important in just about every industry.
This has got to be making people in the West a little nervous. I mean, policymakers and industry leaders must be realizing they need to step up their game if they want to stay competitive in this new AI-driven economy.
Oh, for sure. China's rise in the tech world is a wake-up call for the West. They need to rethink their strategies and invest more in research and development if they want to hold on to their position.
One source mentioned something called the Stargate project in the U.S. Can you tell me more about that?
The Stargate project is a huge initiative. It's a $500 billion investment that was announced in response to China's progress in AI. The idea is to create top-notch AI infrastructure in the U.S. and encourage innovation in key sectors.
So basically, the U.S. government is trying to catch up in the AI race. Do you think it'll be enough?
It's hard to say. The Stargate project is a big investment, but it faces some challenges. One of the biggest is the way the U.S. has traditionally approached AI development. It's been mostly closed source.
So it's kind of ironic, the same thing that made Silicon Valley successful protecting its intellectual property might actually be holding it back now.
That's a really good point. China's open source approach to AI is creating a much more collaborative and dynamic environment. It allows them to improve their models much faster.
It seems like the rules of the game are changing. The US used to be able to call the shots in global trade and tech, but now China's challenging that.
And that creates a lot of uncertainty. No one knows for sure how this shift in power will play out, but one thing is clear, the global economy is changing and China is right at the center of it.
This is a lot to take in. It feels like we're living in a techno-thriller with global stakes.
It's a fascinating time for sure, and it's complex. And understanding what's going on is really important if we want to navigate these changes well.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture. What does China's rise in tech mean for globalization? The way we understand it now.
That's a great question. One of the biggest impacts could be that the global economy starts to fragment. As China becomes more self-sufficient, it might rely less on Western markets and supply chains.
So instead of one big interconnected global economy, we might end up with competing economic blocks, each with their own rules and technologies.
Exactly. And we're already seeing some signs of this happening. The U.S. is trying to separate its economy from China's, and other countries are having to choose sides. It creates a lot of uncertainty for businesses and investors because the rules are constantly changing.
And this economic fragmentation is happening alongside rising geopolitical tensions, too.
Absolutely. The rivalry between the U.S. and China goes beyond just economics. Both countries are flexing their military muscles and trying to increase their influence on the world stage.
So it's not just about smartphones and chips anymore. It's about global power.
Exactly. This competition is playing out in so many different ways. Trade technology, military, even diplomacy. It's like a high-stakes chess game with multiple dimensions.
Wow. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but it's so important to understand what's happening because these changes will affect us all for years to come.
Okay, we've talked about the economic and geopolitical impacts of China's tech dominance. What about everyday people? How is this tech revolution changing their lives in China and around the world?
That's a great question. One of the most noticeable impacts is how quickly mobile technology and digital payments have been adopted in China. They've basically skipped over traditional banking systems and created an economy that runs on mobile devices.
So they're going cashless much faster than other parts of the world.
Exactly. Apps like WeChat and Alipay are everywhere in China. You can use them to buy things online, shop in stores, transfer money. It's created this incredibly dynamic and innovative fintech ecosystem.
And this shift towards a cashless society is also helping e-commerce and the sharing economy grow in China, right?
Absolutely. Platforms like Alibaba and JD.com have become giants in e-commerce. They offer just about everything you can imagine. And the sharing economy is booming with companies like Didi Chuxing for ride-hailing and Meituan for food delivery becoming a normal part of daily life.
So basically, we're seeing technology and society changing together, all driven by the rise of mobile technology.
It's a really interesting example of how technology can change not just industries, but how people live their lives.
It makes you wonder what's next for China's tech sector and what it means for the rest of us. What trends do you think we'll see in the coming years?
One trend that's already picking up speed is the integration of AI into just about everything. We've talked about it in smartphones and consumer devices, but AI is going to become even more important in healthcare, education, transportation, even government services.
So AI is going to be everywhere, not just a cool feature, but part of how things work.
Exactly. And that brings up some important questions about the ethics of AI. Things like data privacy, algorithmic bias, and the potential impact on jobs.
It's true, we've been focusing on the technology itself, but there are definitely ethical considerations that need to be addressed as these technologies evolve.
Absolutely. As technology becomes more powerful and more widespread, it's crucial to have honest conversations about its impact on society. We need to make sure that these technologies are being developed and used responsibly.
So it's not just about technological progress, it's about responsible innovation.
Exactly. And that requires collaboration, not just between countries, but between scientists, policymakers, and everyday people. We need to work together to create a future where technology benefits humanity as a whole.
We'll definitely have to come back to that topic in a future episode because those ethical considerations are only going to become more important as these technologies continue to develop. But for now, let's switch gears and talk about another exciting area of China's tech scene, their advancements in renewable energy. One of the articles you sent talked about China's big goals for becoming a leader in clean energy.
This is really interesting because it shows how China is trying to tackle climate change while also positioning themselves as a leader in a rapidly growing industry. They've been putting a lot of money into solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, and they're making a lot of progress in developing better battery technologies.
So they're not just following global trends, they're setting their own pace.
Right. They're setting ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions and moving towards a more sustainable energy future. They see that the future of energy is green and that this transition is a huge economic opportunity.
It's another example of that long-term thinking we've been talking about. They're looking ahead, anticipating future needs, and getting ready to take advantage of them.
Exactly, and you see that approach in a lot of different sectors. They're investing heavily in biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and space exploration. They know these fields will be essential for driving innovation and economic growth in the decades to come.
It's pretty clear that China's playing the long game, making strategic investments and setting themselves up to be a major force in the global tech landscape.
Absolutely, and this shift in power is having a big impact all over the world. It's forcing other countries to reevaluate their own strategies and figure out what's important to them.
It's an exciting time, but also uncertain, full of opportunities and challenges.
It is, and it's a time that requires us to pay attention, analyze what's happening, and be willing to adapt as the global landscape of technology continues to change rapidly.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, everything from super advanced AI to what the future of electric vehicles looks like. And one thing is clear, China's tech scene, it's not just about catching up anymore.
Right, they're setting trends, they're innovating, they want to be the leaders.
Yeah, and they're not afraid to challenge how things have always been done.
Not at all.
I mean, their success with open source AI models like DeepSeek is a perfect example. It's a totally different approach to innovation. One that's all about working together and making changes quickly.
That's a really key point. Their willingness to experiment and try new things, that's a big reason why they're making progress so fast. They're not stuck in the old ways of thinking, and they're not afraid to take risks.
So what does this all mean for the future of tech globally? Is it like a winner-take-all situation where one country comes out on top? Or can China and the West both succeed?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's easy to see it as a competition, a race to be the best. But I think there's also a chance for both sides to benefit.
What do you mean?
Well, think about that open source AI model we talked about. It's already starting to change how AI is being developed in the West. Companies are realizing that working together and sharing knowledge, even with their competitors, can be a good thing.
So China's approach to innovation could actually help everyone, even those who saw them as a threat at first.
Definitely. And it just goes to show that technology doesn't care about borders. Ideas can spread and innovation can happen anywhere. The challenge is to create an environment where those ideas can grow, but also manage the risks that come with them.
That reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the ethical side of all this technology. We talked about how AI could be used for surveillance and to control people. Those are serious concerns that we can't ignore.
Absolutely. As technology gets more powerful, we need to be talking about these ethical questions. We need to make sure that these technologies are used to help humanity, not hurt it.
So it's not just about progress for the sake of progress. It's about making sure that progress is responsible.
Exactly. And that requires everyone to work together, not just different countries, but scientists, policymakers, and regular people. We need to figure out how to shape a future where technology works for us, not the other way around.
So for our listeners, what's the takeaway from all this? What should they keep in mind as they learn more about China's tech scene?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and be involved. Don't just read the headlines or believe the simplest explanations. Look deeper, explore different points of view, and really think about what these technological changes mean.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. It's clear that China's ambitions in the tech world are changing everything, and the future is going to be full of exciting opportunities, but also some big challenges.
It's a really dynamic and interesting time, and it's something we'll keep exploring in future episodes, so stay with us and keep sending us those articles and reports.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and interesting. And as always, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper into the ideas that are shaping our world.